The moment I walked into the lawyer's office for my father's will reading, I knew something wasn't right. My cousin, Adam, leaned back in his chair with that smug look of his, chuckling as he casually tossed out, "I already took my share and blew it all. So, good luck getting anything." The lawyer didn't flinch. Instead, he quietly slid a folder across the table toward Adam. "Before you get too comfortable, you might want to take a look at this first." I watched Adam's smirk fade into confusion as he opened the folder. The tension in the room thickened, and I felt my stomach churn. I'd had a complicated relationship with my father, and honestly, I wasn't expecting much. But something about Adam's reaction told me that today, everything was about to change. The room felt unnaturally still, as though the very air was waiting for something to happen. The polished wood of the mahogany table seemed to absorb the tension, amplifying it with every passing second. I settled into my seat, my fingers gripping the edge as though trying to anchor myself in a sea of uncertainty. Though my relationship with my father had been strained over the years, I was here out of respect. And yet, as I glanced across the table at Adam, who was casually flipping through his phone as though he was at a spa instead of a will reading, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go horribly wrong. Mr. Daniels, the lawyer, broke the silence with a quiet cough, his voice smooth and measured. "Thank you both for coming today," he said, adjusting his glasses as he shuffled through the papers in front of him. "As you know, Mr. Williams' estate is to be divided according to his final wishes. Before we begin, any questions?" Adam looked up, that same smug grin spreading across his face. "Nah, let's get on with it," he said dismissively, barely looking at Mr. Daniels as he tossed his phone onto the table. But there was something in the lawyer's calm demeanor, in the way he slowly reached for the document, that made my chest tighten. Something told me we were about to find out exactly why we were here, and it wouldn't be what either of us had expected. Before I share what happened next, how the will reading took an unexpected turn, let me know where you're watching from. Drop your country's flag in the comments below and tell me what you think is coming. If you've ever had a moment when everything changed in an instant, hit that like button, because trust me, this story is about to get even more interesting. As Mr. Daniels began reading the will, I watched Adam carefully, his posture completely relaxed as if he were waiting for a paycheck instead of a life-changing inheritance. He leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming idly on the table, wearing an expensive suit that seemed out of place for someone who had always been more comfortable in jeans and a t-shirt. His eyes gleamed with a self-assuredness that made my skin crawl. He had no idea what was coming, but he acted like he had already won the lottery. The lawyer's steady voice filled the room as he detailed the division of assets. "Your uncle left a substantial amount in trust, which will be divided between you both." I could feel Adam's grin widening, his eyes gleaming with the certainty that he would walk out of here richer than he had ever dreamed. But as Mr. Daniels paused, I noticed something subtle, a flicker of unease behind his calm demeanor. He placed the next page of the will down on the table with deliberate care, as if preparing us for something monumental. However, Mr. Daniels continued, "The inheritance, which was held in trust, has already been distributed to Mr. Adam Williams, 6 months prior to Mr. Williams' passing." Adam's laughter rang out before the words even fully settled in the air. "Oh, I was wondering when this would come up," he said with a careless shrug, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Spent it all already. Houses, cars, the whole lot." He leaned back in his chair again, clearly enjoying my stunned silence. I stared at him, my heart sinking. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. But Adam? He just sat there, beaming like the world was his, completely unaware that the ground beneath him was about to give way. Just as I was starting to process what Adam had said, Mr. Daniels leaned forward, his expression unchanging. He reached for another folder, one that hadn't been on the table before, and slid it across to Adam without a word. The smooth motion was almost too calm, too deliberate. Adam barely glanced at it, still wrapped in his own smug triumph. But as he reached out to take the folder, something in the air shifted. It was as though the weight of what was about to happen pressed down on all of us, yet none of us were ready for it. "Before you get too comfortable," Mr. Daniels said, his voice calm but firm, "I suggest you read this first." Adam's fingers paused on the folder's edge, his grin faltering slightly. He opened it, scanning the pages with a furrowed brow. Then, his face turned pale. It was as though the color drained from his features all at once. His breath caught in his throat, and for the first time since we'd sat down, I saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. What is this?" Adam stammered, his voice no longer steady, his hands shaking as he flipped through the pages. The cocky facade he'd worn so effortlessly was starting to crack, piece by piece. Mr. Daniels didn't respond immediately. He just sat back in his chair, folding his arms, watching Adam with an almost amused look on his face. "That, Adam," he said finally, "is what we call a trap." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything that was about to unravel. Adam's smugness had completely vanished, replaced by something I hadn't seen in him before: real, raw panic. Adam's face drained of color as he flipped through the pages, each one seemingly worse than the last. His breathing grew shallow, his fingers trembling more with each line he read. This can't be real," he muttered under his breath, as if hoping that somehow, the truth would disappear if he said it enough times. But the more he read, the more his confident posture crumbled. The arrogance that had once radiated from him was replaced by something raw and desperate, a man realizing that everything he thought he knew, everything he had counted on, was slipping through his fingers. I could feel a cold smile spreading across my face as the truth settled in. For the first time in this entire ordeal, Adam seemed small. Weak. He looked up from the pages, his eyes wide with disbelief, as if the words were too much for him to comprehend. What is this?" he stammered, his voice breaking. Mr. Daniels didn't flinch. He remained as unbothered as ever, adjusting his glasses with a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Your uncle wasn't a fool, Adam. He knew you would try something like this." It was then that the full weight of what had just happened hit me. My father had set him up, built a trap with a false inheritance, knowing exactly what Adam would do. And now? Adam was staring at the wreckage of his own choices. The smugness that had been his shield was gone, and in its place was a man caught, exposed, and facing the consequences of his own greed. Adam's hand shook as he turned the pages, desperately searching for something, anything, that might prove this was all a mistake. But the more he read, the clearer it became: there was no escape. His voice cracked as he tried to argue, to deny what was right in front of him. This is some kind of joke, right?" His eyes darted frantically between the papers, his face twisting in a mix of confusion and anger. But no matter how hard he tried, the truth wouldn't bend for him. I could barely hide the satisfaction building inside me. Mr. Daniels remained cool and composed, his voice unwavering. "Your father anticipated you'd try to access the inheritance early. He set up a dummy trust, knowing that if you went ahead and took the money, it would trigger a clause in his will that would disinherit you from everything else." Adam's mouth opened, but the words wouldn't come. His chest heaved with the realization that the very thing he thought would make him rich had, instead, sealed his fate. He was trapped, and there was no way out. I leaned in slightly, watching as Adam's world collapsed around him. "So, everything you took? It wasn't even real." I let the words hang in the air, watching his face drain of color. The smugness that had once defined him was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, empty look of defeat. Mr. Daniels took a breath, letting the moment settle, before delivering the final blow. "Your father also instructed us to pursue full legal action if you misused the trust. And now, that's exactly what we'll do." I could feel the weight of it. Adam, once so sure of his victory, was now on the receiving end of a cold, unyielding justice. The look on his face was priceless, as if the very ground beneath him had shifted, leaving him stranded with nothing. For a moment, Adam just sat there, stunned into silence, as if he couldn't quite grasp the magnitude of his downfall. His breathing came in short, panicked gasps, his fists clenched at his sides as he tried to collect himself. Then, without warning, the look in his eyes shifted, determination mixed with a kind of frantic desperation. "You think this is it?" he sneered, his voice laced with venom. I'm not going down like this. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, the anger in his movements belying the deep sense of fear creeping in. I'll leave the country, he muttered to no one in particular, as if convincing himself more than anyone else. I'll disappear. It wasn't long before I heard the news from Mr. Daniels. 3 days later, Adam had vanished. At first, I figured he was just hiding out, maybe trying to lay low until the dust settled. But when Mr. Daniels called me, the urgency in his voice told a different story. We've got a problem, he said, his tone all business. Adam bought a one-way ticket to Argentina, and we intercepted him at the airport. The words hit me like a cold wave. Did he make it? I asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it. Mr. Daniels paused, and I could almost hear the small smile in his voice. No. He didn't. The smugness that had once defined Adam's every step had now turned into sheer panic as he was apprehended with a fake passport, a suitcase full of cash, and a glaring mistake, one he wouldn't be able to talk his way out of. Adam had tried to outrun the consequences, but the law, it seemed, had already caught up with him. And the best part? He never saw it coming. I couldn't help but feel a cold sense of satisfaction as the news of Adam's failed escape spread. There he was, once the man who thought he had outsmarted us all, now a prisoner of his own arrogance. The world he'd built on lies and manipulation had crumbled in an instant, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from the aftermath. He'd spent months preparing to flee, convinced he could outrun the consequences, but the law had caught up with him, and it was glorious to watch. As I stood in that room, hearing Mr. Daniels speak with unwavering calm about the legal repercussions, I felt a deep sense of finality settle in. Everything he acquired with that stolen money? Mr. Daniels continued, his voice measured and precise. It's all gone. Liquidated to cover his debts. For a moment, Adam just sat there, stunned, his shoulders slumped under the weight of the reality that no matter how much he tried to run, he could never escape the truth. He thought he could buy his freedom, that he could outrun the consequences of his greed. But now, he was left with nothing, his properties, his wealth, his pride, all wiped out in an instant. I let the silence hang in the air, feeling the weight of it sink in. Every part of Adam's life had been carefully dismantled by his own choices. And as the pieces fell apart, I felt a rush of something unexpected, vindication. It wasn't just about the money, or even about what he had done to my father. It was the fact that in the end, Adam had played himself. There was no victory in gloating, no need to rub it in. Adam's downfall was its own reward. Watching his carefully constructed life unravel, piece by piece, was all the revenge I needed. And the best part? I hadn't even had to lift a finger. Just when I thought it was all over, the silence was shattered by an unexpected letter. It arrived 6 months after Adam's sentencing, handwritten and unmarked, as though it had been sent from the depths of nowhere. At first, I almost tossed it aside, certain it was nothing more than another desperate attempt to drag me back into his world. But something stopped me. I tore open the envelope, and there it was, a single chilling sentence that made my blood run cold. You think this is over? I have friends. You took everything from me. Now I'm taking something from you. I read it twice, each word sinking in deeper. The familiar sense of unease returned, like a dark cloud settling over me. I knew Adam wasn't the kind of man to take defeat quietly. Even behind bars, he was still dangerous, still scheming. But this wasn't just anger, it was a threat, one I knew I couldn't ignore. I locked all my doors that night, but the lingering dread didn't leave. Days passed without incident, and I began to think maybe he was bluffing, maybe he had given up. But then, in the dead of night, the break-in happened. It was 3 a.m. when the security system went off, the blaring alarm yanking me out of a dead sleep. My heart pounded as I rushed to the monitor. Someone was trying to force their way in. By the time the police arrived, the intruder was gone. But they had left something behind, a single playing card, a joker, taped to my front door. I stood there, staring at it, my mind racing. It was clear now, Adam wasn't done yet. And neither was I. The sight of that Joker card left me with a sense of cold, calculated resolve. Adam wasn't just playing games anymore, this was personal. I couldn't afford to wait around any longer, not with the shadows of his former life creeping back into mine. The next morning, I set my plan into motion, hiring a private investigator to track down the people who might still be working for him. I wasn't going to leave anything to chance, not with my family's safety on the line. It didn't take long for the PI, a sharp-eyed man named Henderson, to come back with names, dangerous names. Victor Cole, a former accountant who had helped Adam launder money, Ray Bones Martinez, an enforcer who had a reputation for breaking bones before asking questions, and Samantha Price, an ex-girlfriend who was more than just a lover, she was the mastermind behind many of Adam's schemes. The web Adam had spun was vast, but it was crumbling fast. Henderson leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. These people? They don't scare easy. They don't back down. I clenched my fists, my decision firm. Neither do I. I knew exactly what I had to do. I baited them. I made it seem like I was preparing to move all of my family's liquid assets into a single, vulnerable account, an easy target, something they couldn't resist. And of course, I let the right people know. 3 days later, Samantha Price walked into the bank, all confidence and no fear. She tried to withdraw a large sum, using forged documents, completely unaware that the account had already been flagged. The moment she handed over the fake paperwork, the alarms went off. She didn't get away. And when the police moved in, she cracked faster than I could blink. Faced with multiple felonies, she betrayed Adam and spilled everything. Victor Cole? Arrested for fraud and tax evasion. Ray Bones Martinez? Caught with illegal weapons and outstanding warrants. And Adam? Even locked away, he was still orchestrating his revenge from behind bars. But now, his allies had all fallen, one by one, and his fate was sealed. The game had shifted, and I was no longer playing defense. Adam had thought he could outsmart me, but now it was his turn to lose everything. This time, there was no escape. Adam had always believed that money was power. He thought he could buy his way out of anything, manipulate his way to freedom, and escape the consequences of his actions. But as his network of criminals crumbled and his schemes fell apart, I could see the shift in him. The cocky grin that once defined him was long gone, replaced with something far worse, desperation. He thought he could still fight, still find a way to win. But it was too late. It didn't take long for the courts to review the evidence. The papers, the fraudulent signatures, the lies he had built his entire empire on, everything had come crashing down on him. Adam's original 15-year sentence? It was now 35 years. No parole. A life sentence, in every sense of the word. I thought that would be the end of it. But when I received his lawyer's letter, I realized Adam's obsession was far from over. The letter was full of threats, demands for a settlement. A settlement. After everything he'd done, he was now begging for money. I could barely contain my laughter as I read the words on the page. There was no settlement coming for him, not now, not ever. I hired my own lawyer, one with the skills and resources to finish what had already begun. And I didn't just fight back, I countersued. For damages, for the emotional distress, for everything he had tried to take from me. The judge took one look at Adam's criminal record and threw his case out in an instant. As for my countersuit? It was approved. The court ruled that all of Adam's remaining assets, including his prison wages and any future inheritance, would go to me. Every dime he earned from behind bars? Mine. The final letter I sent him was short and simple. Now you work for me. Enjoy the next 35 years. I never heard from him again. But I knew, somewhere in that prison cell, he read that letter and realized exactly what I had done. I had destroyed him, not just legally, but completely. Everything he had fought for, every ounce of power he thought he had, was now mine. His defeat was final. Adam had spent his life thinking he could cheat, lie, and steal his way through. But in the end, it was the law that caught up with him. And me? I had won. The final victory, and the last laugh, was mine.